Okay, today we are diving deep into a massive, high-stakes strategic battle, one that's being fought right now across Africa. But this isn't a fight over land or gold. It's a contest for an invisible asset that is going to absolutely define the continent's entire digital future, its economic power, and frankly, its national security.
So, let me just ask you something. When you think about Africa's most valuable, finite natural resources, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Probably oil, right? Or maybe gold, diamonds, cobalt?
Well, believe it or not, the answer is none of those things. The single most critical, limited resource for Africa's future in the 21st century is completely invisible. We're talking about the radio frequency spectrum. We're talking about the airwaves themselves.
To really get why these invisible airwaves are such a big deal, we need to break down what this invisible infrastructure actually is and the massive role it plays in, well, pretty much everything we do, every single day.
So, in the simplest terms, the radio frequency spectrum is just a huge range of invisible airwaves. The best way to think about it is like a massive natural highway system up in the sky. And it's on these invisible highways that all of our wireless data travels.
So, who's actually using these highways? Well, it turns out pretty much everyone and everything. It's not just the 4G and 5G that's connecting your phone. It's not just TV broadcasts or the GPS that gets you from A to B. We're talking about the critical communication lines for police, fire, and ambulances. It is the absolute backbone of national defense systems. Even things like remote healthcare and education depend entirely on having access to these airwaves.
And this is where we hit the core problem. The number of lanes on this invisible highway, it's fixed. It is a finite resource. But the demand for it, from all the new tech like the Internet of Things, drones, next-gen mobile networks, that demand is absolutely exploding. So you've got this massive conflict, a huge escalating demand for a strictly limited supply. So if you're a government, you are facing a gigantic choice. How on earth do you decide who gets to use which lanes on this highway? This is where policy steps in, and believe me, the decisions made right here have enormous, long-lasting consequences. Generally, there are three main ways you can manage this. First, you can offer an exclusive license. This is great for encouraging companies to pour billions into building a network, but it can also lead to really high prices for consumers. Then, you have the total opposite, unlicensed spectrum, like the kind your Wi-Fi uses. It's amazing for innovation, but it runs the risk of becoming a total traffic jam. And then there's a really complex hybrid called dynamic sharing, which cleverly finds and uses empty bits of airtime on frequencies that are already in use, like military radar. So as you can see, every single choice comes with a major trade-off.
Now, this brings us to what is probably the single biggest temptation for any policymaker, the billion-dollar money trap. It forces a really brutal choice between getting a massive pile of cash today or building a foundation for digital growth that could last for decades.
And here's that dilemma laid bare. If you focus on auction revenue, you get this huge, politically popular lump of cash up front. But that huge cost just gets passed down to consumers, and it forces companies to only build networks in the most profitable cities. On the other hand, if you focus on long-term productivity, you get less cash up front, but you create sustained tax revenue, you drive real innovation, and, this is crucial, you make it possible to get network coverage to everyone, including people in rural areas.
So you see, chasing that short-term cash isn't just a questionable economic decision, it actively makes the digital divide worse. It becomes a policy choice that literally works against the goal of getting fair, universal access to everybody. And if you want to see the real-world impact, just look at this number. When auction prices are jacked up way too high, mobile operators have been shown to abandon as much as 60% of their planned network expansions into rural areas. That's millions of people left behind on the wrong side of the digital divide by design.
But look, it's not enough to just hand out the spectrum licenses. You also have to defend the airwaves. Because when this invisible highway gets dangerously crowded or polluted with electronic noise, critical systems, they start to fail. Just imagine this for a second. One moment, everything's working perfectly. Your mobile money transfer goes through securely. Your flight's navigation system is completely accurate. And then, in an instant, it's just chaos. This isn't science fiction, you guys. This is the very real threat of spectrum interference.
See, harmful interference isn't just a bit of static on your car radio. It's the serious degradation of a signal by unwanted electronic noise. And it becomes a direct, measurable threat to human life when it messes with air traffic control or emergency services. and a major threat to the economy when it disrupts things like mobile banking.
And this interference can come from anywhere. Sometimes it's as simple as too many people in one area using their phones at once. A lot of the time, it's totally unintentional, just electronic noise from poorly made stuff like cheap chargers or LED light bulbs. But sometimes it can be intentional and malicious, like someone using a jammer to block signals, or even spoofing GPS to mislead an aircraft.
So all of these challenges, the scarcity, the allocation, the interference, it all comes down to a single crucial choice for the continent. It's a choice between sticking with outdated policies and risking total stagnation or truly modernizing for the future.
And that future? It's pretty much already here. We have amazing technologies like low Earth orbit satellites that can deliver broadband to the most remote village imaginable. We have AI that can manage networks with incredible efficiency. We even have these things called cognitive radios that can intelligently hop between unused frequencies to avoid all that congestion. But, and this is a big but, here's the problem. The rules and regulations we have for managing spectrum, most of them were written for a simple world of big, static radio towers. They are dangerously outdated. They were built for a world that just doesn't exist anymore, and they simply cannot handle these new dynamic technologies.
So what's the answer? What should policymakers do? Well, the playbook is actually pretty clear. First, prioritize long-term productivity over that short-term cash grab. Second, create clear, predictable rules so companies feel confident making massive long-term investments. Third, you've got to update the regulations to actually allow new technologies like satellites to help close that digital divide. And finally, you have to proactively defend the airwaves by setting really high standards for all the electronic gear sold in your country.
And that really leaves us with the ultimate question. And this isn't just for policymakers, it's for all of us. If you were the one in charge, facing all the political pressure for that immediate cash, but knowing the huge long-term costs, how would you balance the price a country charges for access to its airwaves with the profound promise of progress for every single one of its people?